Hello, hello. Welcome to Common Censored. I'm Lee Camp here with Eleanor Goldfield.
Hello.
And this is the show where we talk censored stories and people, sensible solutions, and common ground movements to fight and build.
And sometimes other stuff like...
And oh my God!
I'm just going to go ahead and say that you guys should take out like a pen and paper, maybe like a family tree of corruption type of
Holy
drawing.
shit.
Because there's so much shit. My head's spinning.
Now, depending on when you listen to this, maybe they've finally given some results to Iowa, maybe they haven't, but it doesn't really matter because the most of what we're talking about will not change because the results is only a small piece of what the fuck is going on here.
And most of what we're talking about won't be talked about.
Yeah, won't be talked about in your mainstream. Some of you may have been following it, but really you could only get it from Twitter. But what the fuck just happened in Iowa? And you can kind of, I'm going to try and piece this together in a rational way because there's so many little pieces that are coming together here. But I think to start, so we're recording this Tuesday morning. The results of Iowa were supposed to come out last night. They obviously did not, and we're going to get into all the reasons behind that in a second. But I want to couch it in this. You've got to understand that the DNC, you all know they're trying to stop Bernie Sanders, yes, but they needed to specifically stop the caucus states because, first of all, caucus states tend to go more progressive. This is how Obama actually beat Hillary Clinton because we all know he turned out to not be very progressive, but in the moment, in 2008, people thought he was progressive. So he beat Hillary Clinton with these caucus states because in these, you have to stand up and show energy. You have to convince others that you're into a certain candidate. And so Bernie Sanders does very well in the caucus states, and they knew the DNC, the machine, which includes the Biden campaign, the Buttigieg campaign, the Klobuchar campaign, they're all really connected in this machine, and to some degree the Warren campaign, to stop the progressive. So they have to stop the caucus states. So something you need to know is that the DNC got rid of half the caucus states after 2016. They realized there's too much of a progressive movement in the Democratic Party, so they got rid of half, and so now they've got these remainder caucus states, and one of them is one of the most important states in the entire fucking election, Iowa, because it's first, because it happened last night. And how do you stop people standing up and holding their hands up and saying, I'm voting for so-and-so? How do you game that? How do you rig that? Well, do you want to give it away?
Well, I'd first just like to say that although caucuses are harder to rig than primaries, they're equal. I mean, not equally, but they're also very fucking bizarre. So I'm reading one of the tweets from a guy named Sean Sebastian, who is the caucus secretary for Story County Precinct 1-1, and basically he has this great thread about how 111 votes for Sanders, 68 for Warren, and 47 for Buttigieg in his precinct ended up being 2 delegates for each one of those people.
Right, because there ends up
crazy
there's a second vote, and yeah.
He says, so the formula to apportion delegates is the total number after second alignment times the total number of delegates divided by the total number of people at the caucus. What? Why? Why is that? Why is that the fucking formula? The formula should be, there's a lot of people over here. There's not that many people over here. Let's count those people, and that's who fucking wins. Why are there multiplication tables and division? Like, why the fuck would you do that?
Well, agreed. That's a standard.
Sorry,
that's just a complaint of caucuses in general. But so what they did, because they knew they needed to undermine the caucus states, but you're not voting on black box machines. They created a black box app. Because they were like, you know what? We're very much more comfortable with black box machines or devices or apps where no one can know what the fuck's happening in them. So they created this app called Shadow Inc., or Shadow, which is created by Shadow Inc. I mean, honestly, could you write some novella with these stupid fucking names?
I know, literally called Shadow.
Incredible. Literally called Shadow, which is now we're finding all this out, by the way. No one would have said a word about this app if the results had come in. But the app is owned by Shadow Inc., which is owned by another company. They don't reveal a lot of their information, such as their staff page on their website is blank. But we do know that it was funded, at least partially, by the Buttigieg campaign and the Biden campaign.
And Robbie Mook, who's an ex-Hillary campaign manager, who was also who also then tweeted, "Sorry, folks, this is from last night. I did not have anything to do with building the Iowa Caucus app. I don't know anything about it, had no role in it, and don't own a company that makes mobile apps." Unfortunately for him, the New York Times, of all people, blew his cover 4 days before he tweeted that in an article that ties him to the Shadow app. So
at
sorry.
the very least, he was a piece of it. That doesn't mean he designed it, but yeah.
No, but
it means the machine is working on this.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
And also another thing that came forward is that the person who owns the app, sorry, I'm looking through all these tweets and everything. So
the CEO of the company, Tara
McGowan tweeted out as soon as Mayor Pete started running, which, by the way, no one knew who he was. It's literally like Guaido in Venezuela. Nobody knew who the fuck this guy was. And then she tweets out, "Oh my God, Mayor Pete is running, smiley face, hearts, smiley face, hearts."
This is when a mayor of a small town declared he had an exploratory committee. This woman was already on his side.
Right. And then she also tweeted out on the 17th of January, "With Shadow, we're building a new model incentivized by adoption over growth, with a deep focus on building the underlying tech infrastructure that will enable campaigns."
Blah, 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 blah. Okay, but you said Guaido. It gets even more Guaido. That Buttigieg, then, for those of you who weren't following, last night when we had no results, late last night, announced he had won. He put out a tweet saying, by all signs, we are going into New Hampshire victorious, despite the fact by no signs are you going into New Hampshire victorious. So much like Juan Guaido, he has announced himself the winner without winning anything.
Oh, and also the CEO of the company that owns the Shadow app is married to Pete's strategist.
Right.
So I told you to get out the fucking family tree of corruption over here.
Okay, so this app that was where all these people are supposed to report what happened to their caucus sites is completely owned and operated by a combination of Biden and Buttigieg, fawning and part of their machines. So Buttigieg announces himself the winner without any evidence, at least coming from the state Democratic Party. And there's an amazing clip. If you go to my Twitter, you can watch it. This morning, Pete Buttigieg is on Morning Joe on MSNBC, which occasionally they'll ask hard questions. It's rare, but they're normally fucking idiots. But one of them asks Buttigieg, he says, "Well, where are you? How did you declare yourself victorious?" And Buttigieg goes into this word salad about, look, if you look at where we began, that we started as a small team, and he just goes into this horse shit. And so the guy then goes, wait, but I get that you're excited that things happened, but what numbers do you have? Do you have something from the Iowa Democratic Party saying you won? And Pete Buttigieg goes, well, no, they haven't released anything. And then the MSNBC host goes, you got nothing. It's incredible. So he is the Juan Guaido of America.
Right,
oh,
yeah.
Sorry. And we're going to keep doing this. Keep remembering we forgot something. Pete Buttigieg is obviously military. He's very proud of the fact that he's military. So you were talking about a U.S. military guy, but he's also likely CIA or something very secretive with the military because, and John Kiriakou, the CIA whistleblower, has brought this up on his show that Buttigieg a few years ago, has one-day trips to small African countries where you can't get, you have to fly into a different country and drive 4 hours through the desert. And why would you ever go there for one day? And and John Kiriakou, who was CIA, goes, this reeks of being CIA.
Right. And Buttigieg was claiming that it had something to do with like his business ventures. And it's like, that's not something you do for a business venture. These are not places that have like burgeoning economies that can boost your bottom line. These are CIA targets. And And I think like another little kind of words, another
Puzzle piece.
another
Dot.
thank you. Another summary here. Basically, like, to sum up what we're talking about here is that the Dems paid a company literally called Shadow to create a caucus app. Buttigieg campaign also paid Shadow, and we've already noted that the CEO is a fan of Buttigieg and her husband works for Buttigieg.
Oh,
but they also paid.
But that's coming from Open Secrets, which
Right.
is not this is not some fringe blogger we're talking about.
You can follow
This
the
is-
money trail, literally.
Yeah.
Then the caucus app fails, and then Buttigieg declares himself the Iowa winner with no results. And another person wrote, it honestly never crossed my mind that the Iowa result would be, quote, the CIA used the Buttigieg campaign as a front to fund a vote counting app called Shadow to rig the results in favor of Pete, but it crashes. But now that it's happened, how could I have thought of anything else? And to be clear, they haven't rigged the results, and this is the, as Lee noted, this is the problem with caucuses. It's really hard to do that. This guy Sean Sebastian, who is who works with who works with the caucuses in Iowa, said that it's people agreed on the results. Everybody's in the room. They saw every stage of the count, so it's a lot more difficult to rig, right? But the problem is with the technical difficulties. People were on hold for hours trying to report their results. The app wasn't working, so you have this forced delay,
Right.
and then you have someone like Pete saying that they won. And what really pisses me off is that Bernie didn't take the time to be like, fuck you guys.
He never does.
No, I know.
He never does.
But this guy, Sean Sebastian, also noted that he tweets, the technical difficulties reporting the results of the Iowa caucus has just caused a delay, but eventually we will find out the results. The real problems with the Iowa caucus started before we even got into the room. And
Right.
that's a very good point, because as we've been noting, these ways of trying to delay and trying to force a win for people like Buttigieg or Biden or whatever, and Biden totally choked. But also another thing to note, that just a day before the Iowa caucuses, the DNC announced a new project to, quote, fight disinformation online, specifically targeting users who use terms like rigged. And this was all headed by a former Hillary staffer.
So hold on, I want to get into that in a second, but I also want to tell people that here are Bernie's internal numbers, and I know we're going really fast because we're amped up and pissed off. But-
It's a manic episode.
But I do want to slow down and go through some of the details of this. But Bernie's internal numbers show that he got 28.6% of the vote. Buttigieg got 25.7%. Sorry, of the delegates. Warren got 18.4%. Biden got 15%. And anecdotally, I occasionally had CNN and MSNBC on, and they're in these various caucus sites. And in all the caucus sites, you've got Bernie either winning or very close to winning. You've got Buttigieg somewhere in the middle, Warren somewhere in the middle, and Biden just fucking eating it. So if there's one thing that we know has happened, that is a story from these Iowa caucuses without having the final numbers, is that Biden is sucking wind, man. And recently the polling has shown that Biden he was back behind Bernie, but he wasn't like fucking nothing. And it might be that the impeachment is actually having the effect that people now understand Biden was involved in this corruption in the Ukraine, publicly bragged about firing that prosecutor and stuff like that. So maybe that's finally having the impact that everyone thought it might. But anyway, I thought you'd like to hear. Those are Bernie's internal numbers coming from caucus sites. So now I want to go back and say, and kind of
Set the stage.
Well, re-engineer how this,
reverse engineer.
Reverse engineer how this came about. I did a little bit of it earlier where I said they needed to stop caucus sites. But like you said, they also, so when they decide they're going to do this, we're going to create an app. What are their goals? Is their goal to full on rig it, or is it, I think it's more likely, because caucuses are done publicly, that it was really just to make it confusing enough and delay the results from coming out so that Bernie could not get the bump that Iowa generally gives. Generally, Iowa often picks the person that goes on to become the nominee, and it's sorry, I have a cold, and it's because the mainstream media sees who won Iowa and just talks about them endlessly. Donors start flooding in, and it kind of snowballs.
Well, and let's not forget that the last Iowa poll was canceled because of Buttigieg.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So in order to decrease the bump from that Bernie would get from winning Iowa, you have to delay the results. You also have to stop the big polls from coming in, because the polls will. And we saw this last time in 2016. Hillary, what really revealed how rigged our primaries was the difference between the polls, both exit polls and pre-game polls, pre-election polls, pre-election polls, and the actual results. So why are the polls so different from the results? So what has the Democratic Party done? It's gotten rid of almost entirely all exit polls. And as you just mentioned, Buttigieg almost single-handedly got the biggest poll that comes out right before the Iowa caucus that everyone knows is the gold standard of polls that's supposed to come out a day or two before. He got that to not come out. And do you want to talk about how he did that? Because they claim that someone was left off the polling.
I think you know more about that one than I do.
Okay, sorry. They claimed that.
Way to make me look stupidly.
No, shut up. I read half of one article. They claimed that someone was left off the polling, but if you read the title of this article, and this one was in the Independent, it said poll held back, or poll not released because Buttigieg was left off the polling. But when you read the actual article, there's evidence it was left off of one phone call. That a candidate was left off of one phone call, and Buttigieg's campaign then used that to get the entire poll thrown out. So basically, in order to do this, to game this system with this app, you have to stop the polling, which they did successfully. You have to also try and stop the social media reporting and alternative media reporting that you and I do, that so many others do. And so what have you just said, like a few days ago, and they've been doing this for 2 years though, they are purging all of these sites from the Twitter. They just kicked Zero Hedge off the other day, which is not a Democratic site, but they tend to reveal things like rigging of Democratic primaries.
Well, and I think this is a really good point to mention how important Twitter is, because I'm looking at another thread here, and these threads are all over Twitter. If you just look up Iowa Caucus, the hashtag IA Caucus, you see these all over the place. So this guy says, I am precinct captain in Des Moines 7th District. I've been on hold for hours trying to report the results for my precinct, so I'm just going to tweet them out. And he wrote 420 delegates, Sanders 69%, Steyer 31%, no other candidate viable. And you have to get, I believe it's something like 35 people at least to become a viable candidate.
Depends on with the site.
So you have to reach a certain number of people, which is why people were tweeting out images of like Biden. There were like 3 people standing in a corner. That means that he's not a viable candidate because he doesn't reach the threshold to become one. But this is, why places like Twitter are so important, because people were just tweeting their results because they couldn't get through either on the phone or in this stupid fucking app. So without Twitter, we'd all be sitting here wondering, wait, what's going on? But Twitter is kind of taking and it's still powerful that the DNC is able to basically steal this from Bernie without stealing it from Bernie, right? Because as you pointed out, Lee, without the bump here, without coming out and saying clearly that Bernie won, it does take a lot of wind out of his sails moving forward. But without Twitter, there would be no wind. We'd all be stuck in the fucking doldrums. And that's why it's so scary that, what they're talking about with, that's creating the app to flag every time somebody uses the word rigged or things like that is so scary, and taking people like Zero Hedge off, because this could just snowball into anytime somebody's trying to report results, anytime somebody's trying to point out, eccentricities at their polling place, even if they're the quote precinct captain or what have you, they could just get taken off Twitter.
Yeah, and without, I mean, I'm just going to say it again, without things like Twitter. Now, granted, there are some other social media sites, but Twitter's the one that's been the most useful for this. You wouldn't know these things. You wouldn't know that this shadow app was funded by Bernie and Buttigieg's campaign. I mean, it's truly fucking incredible.
Wait, Bernie's campaign?
Sorry, Biden and Buttigieg. Why do they all have to be B names? Biden and Buttigieg's campaign. It's truly fucking incredible that after 2016, where the primaries were rigged, the DNC, in order to deflect attention away from themselves, claimed that the general election was rigged by Russia. But either way, even if you wanted to believe their horseshit McCarthyist crap, still, they're running around going, hacked election, rigged election, Trump won because of rigged hacking, Let's use a shadowy app that everyone at these caucuses doesn't know how to use and just like hand that out and act like that's secure.
And you literally named
you.
it Shadow.
Fuck you, assholes. It is so ridiculous. It is so laughable that would be their answer. That I mean, and that they thought no one would question this shit is fucking incredible.
Well, and they're banking on the fact that people who question it will be silenced. I mean, another example here, I saw this on Twitter again. Somebody tweeted, Americans need to shut the fuck up forever about democratic elections in other countries. And they did a screenshot of a tweet that says, Des Moines Precinct 80. Bernie's group had 101 people. Pete's group had 66 people. Bernie and Pete end up tied at 4 delegates following a coin toss.
Right.
A coin toss. That's democracy.
Right. Why would there be a coin toss when it's 100 to 60? It doesn't make any sense.
It's absurd.
So going forward, what this... And by the way, I want to say that I think their plan slightly didn't work, both because we're figuring it out, but also because I think they were hoping that Buttigieg or Biden would be close enough to Bernie that you could pull this shit off, and that Biden or Buttigieg could announce they won, and Buttigieg did, pulled his Juan Guaido moment and announced he won, but that it would be so close that people couldn't deny it. They would just be like, oh, I guess Buttigieg won, and that Buttigieg would actually get a bump from Iowa despite not winning. You'll notice, but you'll notice it's the opposite of what Hillary Clinton did. Hillary Clinton barely squeaked it out, they claim. I think she probably rigged something there too, but barely squeaked it out in Iowa by 0.2%. And what did the media do? They all ran around saying Hillary wins Iowa. She didn't. I don't even know if she got more delegates from Iowa, but they ran around saying Hillary won Iowa. So this is the opposite. Buttigieg, according to Bernie's internal numbers, now granted these numbers may shift, but lost by 3 percentage points. And yet he's running around claiming victory. So I think their goal was to keep this close enough that people wouldn't really know. Then you delay the results using this ridiculous app, and then Buttigieg declares victory. The media runs with Buttigieg has won, and basically you usurp the victory of Bernie Sanders, going into New Hampshire where he's polling incredibly well. But I mean, this is amazing to watch this car crash happen in slow motion. And the reason they're willing to take risks this large in rigging this shit and playing these games where people are furious is because they're trying not to do what will be their nuclear option, which is basically just overrule Bernie's win at the convention, either with superdelegates or with the new rule saying that the DNC gets to decide if someone's Democratic enough. They're probably hoping... Here's something else you asked... Eleanor, you asked why Bernie isn't fighting these things. They're probably hoping Bernie will start speaking out against the DNC so that they can say he's shown anti-DNC tendencies.
So that they can disqualify him.
Because
that's one of their rules is that you have to show loyalty to the party. And so I do want to mention that so Nick Brana, who's the head of the Movement for a People's Party, has a great, and I had him on my show to go through this 7-point plan on how they're going to rig 2020,
and
which
he used
is already
to be a Bernie.
He worked on Bernie's campaign.
National outreach.
So this he has a great basically layout, a PowerPoint of how the Democrats are, and this has already started happening, how the Democrats are going to steal 2020 from Bernie. And that's one of the things. That's one of the tools that they have in their toolkit. And there's much more to come. And I think the question, as I've mentioned on this show before, the question is, what are people going to do when this happens again? Because as I've said before, and I'm going to keep fucking saying it like a broken record, the vote is only as good as the ultimatum that you deliver with that vote. If you vote and then you're like, all right, I did my part, peace, I'm going to go brunch, then you might as well just not fucking vote. You have to hand that ultimatum and say, if this is not valued, if this is not counted correctly, if there's clear corruption and rigging going on, there will be hell to pay. And if that's not an ultimatum that you hand in with your vote, don't fucking bother. So the question becomes, what are people going to do in order to combat this?
You know why else they figured delaying this would be enough, delaying the results would be enough, is because the State of the Union is tonight, and impeachment...
Oh my God, I didn't even think about that.
And impeachment is Wednesday. So this is the impeachment vote. So this is all... I'm sure they figured... I think this is why... Honestly, I think this is why Nancy Pelosi ultimately agreed with impeachment, was because she knew she needed to distract from the opening two contests, Iowa and New Hampshire, where Bernie would do very well. And hopefully they can force someone in like Bloomberg. And so impeachment ends up being this, fucking circus show that they can say, hey, everybody look over there at that. Don't look at the fact that Bernie's running the table in these early contests.
And as you've noted, you can literally just lock Bernie in a room because the Senate has to be present.
Right.
And so they literally just found a way to lock Bernie in a room so he couldn't campaign, and yet still he won. And if these caucuses, as I mentioned, weren't so fakaked with the multiple times this by your height and then yeah, thank you. You're welcome. Everybody can use that. But like, if they weren't so fucking stupid with this, like divided by the number of people in your family and the dog, whatever the fuck, like if they were just straight up counting the people who were for each candidate, Bernie would have run away with this thing in such an astronomical way.
Yeah. All right, we are going to move on to some other topics. I hope some of that made sense. It's tough to get it all out at once, and I'm sure more details will come forward. I mean, the truth is, maybe by the time you're listening to this, this shadowy app, it is literally titled the Shadow app.
Yep.
This shadowy app will have some results. Maybe by the time you're listening to this, they will have announced that Bernie, squeaked out a win or something. But the point really was to delay it and to confuse it and to make it so that Bernie could not get the bump that Iowa normally provides a candidate. So even if they declare him the winner at the point you're listening to this, it might not matter as much as it would have. Okay, so I want to get to some quick things here. Thank you all so much for those of you who have signed up, have become members, have kept this show going. Recently, we've had an influx of people who see this show, this podcast, as something that's worth a couple of bucks a month. Many people, I'd say most, are probably signed up for less than a coffee a week. And that's incredible. I'd rather this be I'd rather this podcast be funded by a few hundred people donating a couple dollars than one or two people. So it really is awesome of you. Patreon.com/Common Censored. Patreon.com/Common Censored. We have no advertisers. We have no large donors. We have nobody owns this podcast. So please help it keep going. My book is now shipping. It won't be in stores until another month, but if you buy it online now, you get a discount, especially for the hardback, and you can get maybe we still have some signed copies left, leecampbook.com. leecampbook.com. There's also a site for the UK and Europe. Live shows coming up, Dallas and Austin. I'd love to see you there. That's coming up in just a few weeks. Dallas and Austin, Texas. RedactedTour.com is where you can get the info for that. Also added Flagstaff and Tucson. Turns out we couldn't find a great venue for Phoenix, so we're doing Tucson instead. Flagstaff and Tucson. Anyway, that's all at RedactedTour.com. There's several other cities, Asheville, several other cities listed there. Eleanor will be, I think, at a couple of those. We're still sorting it out.
You sound so sheepish when you say that.
We're still sorting it out, but
I will be. Lee won't be at this one, unfortunately.
Yes,
but I
yes.
will be in
Tell us.
Denver on March 19th, which is the 17th. I can't fucking believe it. The 17th anniversary of the second war in Iraq, and I will be playing a show with Army vet Emily Yates. She'll be doing music. I'll be doing music and spoken word. There's going to be some great organizations there as well.
As
That's
you
in
know
Denver.
from our theme song, Eleanor is an amazing musician.
Well, but that's not the music
I
I'm
know
playing.
it's not the music you're playing.
It's important to note.
It's a note about how good a musician you are. Jesus Christ.
Good singer. I'm not a great musician. But anyway.
So that's Denver, everybody. Denver, Colorado.
And you can find more information about that by going to artkillingapathy.com and clicking on performance. All that information is there. The ticket link is there. And yeah.
I also want to add that I've been doing web-exclusive videos almost every week, and a lot of them get into kind of the nitty-gritty of these elections and stuff because I don't always get into those, weeds on Redacted Tonight. So if you go to youtube.com/redactedtonight, subscribe there, click the bell, you'll find out about all those web-exclusive videos, which if you were interested in the first half hour of this show, you probably very much like those videos. And you can text the word censored to 33777 to get signed up for our free email list. Shall we continue?
Indeed. Let's.
The UK has left the EU to have a war of initials. They finally Brexited. And after all this time, after all this fighting, although it seems like a long time, but we've been having an election the entire time that they've been fighting over Brexit.
We've never stopped having an election, to be fair. But yeah, it was most people on the ground there are just saying that it's pretty anticlimactic because they're not going to actually have real shifts in place until the end of the year. So people are still moving freely. They took down the EU flag. The EU took down the British flag out of their halls or whatever. But other than that, right now, as of yet, it's still kind of like, oh, okay. But basically what they're doing now is planning on some trade deals, which again, this is going to be bad for people. There was a lot of, and this is really what brought Jeremy Corbyn down, is that he was very wishy-washy on this because there are a lot of left reasons to not like the EU, right? The EU was created as a way for corporations to fuck people over in a more streamlined way. So it wasn't created in the sort of like altruistic way, like, oh, let's everybody bring together in this lovely family. No, that wasn't the fucking reason for it.
But the lefty reason to stay in it is that as a side effect, which I think was farther down the list when they were deciding to do it, was to decrease the chances of a World War III happening again because you have more connections, more commerce. The nations have more connection with each other and therefore are less likely to think, let me blow up that guy.
True, although on the flip side, you do also have the problem that you ran into in the previous world wars where it's like you have this agreement that if somebody strikes this person, everybody on that other side has to join the fight. So it does create this sort of, which you see with things like NATO and, the coalition of the willing, this idea that, oh, well, if we fight, then you guys all have to join the fight, even if you don't really want to. So that's also the flip side of that coin, especially when the person on your side is the U.S. and we're always fucking fighting someone. It makes it awkward for you if you don't want to fight.
True.
But so there are leftist reasons for wanting to leave the EU, but that's not, of course, why the UK wanted to do it. They wanted to leave it because of racist, I almost said agoraphobic, but xenophobic reasons.
They were like, I want to stay on my little island. I don't like all the open land. Land over there in Europe.
So for xenophobic reasons, and of course, this is not going to help those reasons. People are still going to get to the UK, and even more so, what's going to happen is that with these trade deals, especially with trade deals with the U.S., for instance, you're going to see a hammer taken to things like the NHS, the healthcare service. You're going to see a hammer taken to other social necessities, other public services, because the EU kind of did create a little bit of a buffer against, extreme trade deals like that with the U.S., and all the U.S. wants to do is make money. And that's how they're going to walk into this trade deal with the UK and really try to see how they can use this to their advantage. And if you recall, there was already some reporting about how Boris Johnson was in talks to basically allow the U.S. to take over the NHS and make it more profitable.
So, and so that's what, you talk about how people have to have plans and they've got to know what the next step is. So if you are one of these leftists that wanted the Brexit, now the next step is how do you force these people to actually do the left-wing things you wanted with Brexit, which was things like nationalize the rail lines or whatever, the various things that the farther left had wanted to happen in that country, which were basically banned by the EU agreement. Getting the Brexit may have been step one for you, but what's step 2, 3, and 4? Because they're going to take it to their advantage, like you're saying. They're actually going to do the opposite. They're actually going to privatize the healthcare system.
Right. So I think that's a big question that folks in the UK are going to have to grapple with, particularly because Boris Johnson and then the Conservatives have such a majority in Parliament. These are trying times for the UK. Not that I'm sitting in a glass house saying that shit, but yeah, I think that these are definitely questions that they're going to have to ask in order to protect the dwindling services and protections that they do have.
Well, so maybe they've got to become France, which
everybody should fucking become France.
Our segue.
My vote for best headline in 2020 is French firefighters set themselves alight and start fighting against police. I love this headline.
What does one do when one's alight? Just run around on fire?
You're just on fire and you're fucking awesome. So
That's
I
funny
already
because Biden's campaign was set alight last night,
but they didn't have protective gear.
Yeah, no.
So these firefighters,
with all that plastic surgery, he looks a bit like he's
extremely flammable.
No, well, I was gonna say he's been through some fires.
Oh,
with all that plastic surgery.
I was just gonna say there's so much silicone there, he'll just melt. So basically, the French protests continue, and I know that this has kind of gotten lost in the shuffle because everybody's concerned about whether Mitch McConnell is going to call a fucking witness or not. But the world outside of this shit show here in DC continues to rage on, like these fires. So basically what happened is that French firefighters...
Wow, this is literally... I've never seen firefighters... I'm watching the video now. I've never seen firefighters fighting the cop, like literally fighting the cops.
It's amazing. And this is, again, I think we mentioned this last time, that somebody who listens to the show who lives in Paris had sent a link to an interview with a police officer who said that they're basically getting tired of doing this. And this must have really been one of those moments because no one wants to fight a firefighter. Like, if there's anybody that has like respect in the community as an official, quote unquote, it's a firefighter, because you literally, all you do is save lives. There's images and there's video of these firefighters with their protective gear being set on fire, and then they basically they get attacked by the police.
Well,
they
the smoke,
shoot water cannons.
No one can breathe because of smoke, so they all run. The cops will run back.
Well, right, but also then the police started shooting water cannons at the firefighters, and then a scuffle ensued. But literally, to
put it mildly,
right, you're fighting firefighters, and I think this is another one of those examples of how this must be
symbolism,
right, and this must be grating on maybe not all, because of course there are police who just want to do this, but I think a lot of cops are probably having this crisis of conscience now, like, okay, now I'm being sent out to beat the shit out of firefighters, really?
Right.
And just to circle back, what this is all about is this is about the pension reform, quote unquote, that the Macron administration is trying to push through. And despite the fact that some unions have backed down and said, okay, well, now that the age is back to 62. You don't want to make it 64. We'll sit down. Fine. But a lot of people are saying, fuck you. No, this is not okay. We are going to fight for our basic rights as workers. And I mean, this is amazing. Like, just looking at these images right now, I'm looking at this was in the metro.co.uk from January 28th, and these images are fucking amazing. So there's also French firefighters who painted their faces to look like the Joker, and of course, the images in the video of them setting themselves on fire and walking down and protesting with people in the streets. It's fucking amazing, and I never cease to be amazed at how awesome the French are when it comes to this shit. The UK needs to be like France. We need to be like France. Sweden needs to be like France. Everybody fucking just be like France.
It is pretty incredible what they're doing. I like the talk. I mentioned the symbolism of the firefighters going up against the police, because I think that's important. Because symbolism tends to, sorry the pun, but set a fire in people's minds, kind of get people going in a larger sense. And you and I were looking at a story the other day about the people put mannequins of children in cages outside the Iowa caucuses to kind of remind people of what's going on right now. Now, granted, you and I have pointed out that there were kids in cages under Obama as well. So this is not just a Trump thing, but it's
still a very powerful visual. Very
powerful visual. People should be enraged. And my latest thing I've been harping on is that the media will create that rage. The mainstream media was doing a lot of coverage on these kids in cages, on what's going on at the border. There was a time where all of America was furious about what's going on at our border. I mean, well, anybody who I guess didn't vote for Trump maybe, but was furious about what's going on at our border. But our mainstream media will not then take the next step and agree with an activist who protests it. They're not going to cover the people that are leaving water in the desert to help these people. So it's like you create this outrage, and then you either ignore or act shocked at activists who are like taking the next step, who are standing up against it.
Yeah, no, it's just be like France. That's all I can say.
Do you have a T-shirt that you'd like to sell that says "Be like France"? Or
I mean, it's just again, this kind of circles back to what I was talking about. Like, how are we going to respond when the Democrats steal this? And I think it's also really telling is that, and I think I've mentioned this on the show before, is that these French protests against pension, quote unquote, reform have been going on for years. And years ago, there was a sign that somebody held up at a protest that said, "A worker without a pension is an American." And, I think that, like, we forget that around the world, for instance, workers celebrate May 1st. May Day, which is actually Labor Day, which happened in Chicago. That's the Haymarket Affair. If you look it up, if you Google it, don't read Wikipedia's page because it's fucking stupid. But if you look it up and actually read about what happened, that happened here in the U.S. That is a U.S. fucking holiday. Right. And we've been so amputated from our radical past as a nation, as like a national labor movement, that we forget that these are our roots, really, as children of the current empire. And we have completely lost that sense of radicalism, and the French never lost it, and they're clearly showing what that looks like when you have this prolonged and strong fight against the powers that be, that includes solidarity across movements, solidarity across issues. You have people with the French environmentalist movement, you have Black Bloc, you've got everybody from so-called like moderates to radicals all coming together and saying, no, this is fucked, and we're going to work together to fight this. And I think that's, regardless of whether you are for Bernie or not, you have to say, this is not okay. You can't just fucking steal this shit and have us just sit back. So really, it's not even about whether you like Bernie or whether you fucking plan on voting or not. It's about using this.
Right.
This is a great, jumping off point for getting engaged and saying, you know what, this is the last straw, and now we are using this as a foundation to build on and to address all of the issues that you're not listening to us about. So I think that could be a great jumping off point for us, just like the pension issue is a great jumping off point for French protesters.
That's a great point, that even if you're a third party voter, even if you're, been a long-term Green Party person, where I've been very supportive of the Green Party, even if you're, Nick Brana and the Movement for a People's Party, nobody should want a system that completely obliterates the chances of any true progressive, of anyone who stands for, actually giving people health care, actually decreasing the military-industrial complex. No one should stand for a system that stops that no matter what. And so even if you have been a tried and true Green Party member your whole life, you should still be part of this fight that is, how the system is rigged. And I think you're right that this can serve as a great touch point, as a great spark to get a much larger unity of groups active. Because if you're anti-war, then you should care about this. If you're an environmentalist, you should care about this. If you're, caring about healthcare, you should get angry about this. So we should all be angry and kind of unite and use this as a moment to create large-scale change.
Yeah, and I think that's there's so much purity tests and like, oh, I'm going to wait for the perfect issue, the perfect moment, the perfect person. Then you'll be waiting as you drown or as you burn or whatever. We really have to. And it's not about being lax with your morals or your ethics. It's about being fluid but not flimsy. So be steadfast in what you believe in and how you feel about basic human rights, but be fluid in terms of who you're willing to work with in order to move forward. Otherwise, we're always going to be continuously pushed back together. We're getting pushed back together and yet never reaching out to each other and saying, hey, take my hand. We're going to get this shit done. I don't like your perspective on blah, 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 but we're going to make this work. That has to be the paradigm, as opposed to, I don't think you're radical enough. You don't agree with me perfectly on this or that or the other. So we're just going to die together instead of rising together.
Because divide and conquer is the best trick of the ruling elite. They love nothing more than to separate us into our little groups and say, yeah, you all fight against us separately while we all work together because we're all united by the profit motive. We have nothing else. There is no other issue that matters to us except one, and so we are therefore able to work together to crush you, whereas you guys have a lot of issues you care about. So I think the segue to this next story is, if I can bring it back to the Iowa caucuses, is that there's this amazing video, which fucking made me livid last night, of Mick Mulvaney, Trump's, what is he now, chief of staff. He was his budget guy.
I'm so perplexed by this video.
So he was Trump's budget guy, Mick Mulvaney, and then he became his chief of staff. But he is just a true believer and a fucking supervillain. And unlike Trump, he's not an idiot. Like Trump can barely read. I did a thing on how he doesn't understand how to say words with Q in them last week on Redacted Tonight. Whereas this guy, Mick Mulvaney, I'm sure is super smart, but just has no empathy for fellow human beings and is just working to crush them. Anyway, I don't know why, but this guy was at an Iowa caucus, and he's giving a speech. There's video of him giving a speech, but he's not giving a speech with a microphone, meaning he wasn't. He claims he was there as on his personal capacity, which why would a Republican be at the Iowa caucuses?
Right,
It doesn't make any sense unless it's just to report back to Trump or something. But claimed he was there on his personal reasons to be at the Iowa caucuses. He wasn't planning to be there as an official, but they asked him to speak, so he agreed to speak. So he started speaking to the group, and for some odd reason, they're fucking applauding him, which they...
Yeah, I don't understand.
Maybe they... I know that people are fawn over celebrities, but this is a celebrity supervillain. So, and he starts speaking, and he goes, you know, I put the budget together for 3 years, and we were trying to do really positive things. For example, we wanted to decrease spending on food stamps, and then people accuse us of taking money away from the poor. And we decreased, I think he said, if I have the number right, we got 63,000 people off of food stamps in Iowa, and people, or are going to, or something like that, are slated to. And people say we're taking food away from the poor while we're trying to do something very positive. And that horse shit, that look at how successfully we've crushed the poor even more, is truly phenomenal. It's a sociopath bragging about how he is a sociopath. And that brings us to our next story.
So Medicaid is basically health care for people who can't afford health care in this country, which is basically everybody, but you have to have, there are very specific rules in order to get on Medicaid. I know because I used to be on Medicaid. And, you know, you have to, there's like a proof of poverty and all this other shit. And it's one of those ridiculous things like, well, if you're...
to see what you're wearing or something? They're like, no, wait, where'd these pants come from?
If you're poor...
Did you have your eyebrows threaded? You've had your eyebrows threaded.
If you're poor, but not poor, just not that poor, then you still don't get Medicaid, which is why, of course, so many people don't have access to affordable health care because they're poor, just not that poor.
Which is hilarious because it's like, oh, you can barely afford the minimum health care, so we're going to make it so that if you have a catastrophic issue, you're just fucking done for.
Which is
you're
the
just
same
done
thing.
For.
Which is the same thing with food stamps, which you just mentioned that they're planning to cut. Also with Section 8 housing, like if you make just enough, then you're not eligible for Section 8 housing, but that means that you still can't afford housing. So you might be homeless even though you make more than the person who lives in Section 8 housing. So it's completely fucked. But
it's Caucus.
It's Caucus. You're very happy that I gave you that one, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
So last Thursday, the Trump administration announced a plan that would allow states to convert federal Medicaid funding into block grants, which is basically a longstanding GOP tactic that basically pulls people off of Medicaid. It means that these states don't have to give people Medicaid funding. And basically what...
well, and it also means that if there's a disaster, because they got this block grant, they can't go anywhere for extra money. So when they need extra money for dealing with unforeseen, harm, they're just fucked. Like,
so basically what this will mean is that folks who have Medicaid will face cuts to their services, wait lists for needed care, which they already experience, I can tell you that, and the risk of medical debt and bankruptcy for trying to pay for illness, which is that point that you just mentioned, Lee. And Alice Wong, just to give you an idea of what this looks like on the ground, Alice Wong, director of the Disability Visibility Project, tweeted, "People, poor disabled people in particular, are going to die. That's not an exaggeration." And that's not an exaggeration because Medicaid covers people who are poor, and very often poverty also aligns with being disabled, being already in a marginalized community, for instance, Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks, single parents. So this is a direct hit against the most marginalized and the most vulnerable people in the United States, basically saying, fuck you, I hope you die slowly of whatever it is that's killing you.
Does Hallmark make that card? Can we?
Right, yeah.
In their defense, I hear Trump sends out little cards that say, "Sorry for your death, but thanks for your help."
And this is also why the things like universal health care are so important, because this idea that you should have to go bankrupt or that you should die slowly and terribly in the richest country in the world is fucking absurd. It's disgusting. It's absolutely fucking grotesque. We can pay for universal health care many times over before you would even get to a modicum of the fucking Pentagon budget.
Post-scarcity world. We're in a post-scarcity world. If we actually distributed the resources accurately to people who need them, We live in a world that does not need to have any, limited health care, doesn't need to have anyone homeless, doesn't need to have anyone starving, doesn't need to have anyone without clean water. So it's utter bullshit that this world needs to exist this way, and it's a failure of our fucking cruel and villainous economic system.
Absolutely, and that's why, again, kind of circling back to the jumping off point with the Bernie campaign. First of all, this is why people are drawn to Bernie, because he actually talks about shit that matters to people. Universal health care, a living wage, climate regulations, disability rights, and that's why he's so scary to the establishment and to media. Truth Out released an article last week that talks about the Bernie blackout and how intense it is, and why it's important to note. And so again, it doesn't really matter whether you think Bernie is the perfect candidate. It's about looking at the incredible collaborative effort to drown him, to make him completely unviable as a candidate, when he is the candidate. He's the only candidate that people are looking at and saying, you know what? I agree with you. And because the people agree with him, they are trying to take him down. And that's really all that you need to know in order to feel that this is that this could be a good moment to really activate along these lines, because it's the most clear-cut and powerful and pointed example of the establishment saying, fuck the people, I don't give a rat's ass what the fuck you think. We are going to take down this candidate because he represents what you care about.
And part of being, I think, a successful activist is, and it took me a while to learn this, because I wanted to think that that you could create a large-scale movement out of nothing, and occasionally, but generally, you have to surf on the energy that might not be something you had planned on. That energy could be something like Superstorm Sandy in New York, when New York flooded and Occupy activists helped save people, and it rejuvenated. It both rejuvenated Occupy at the time, but it also rejuvenated the idea that we should be helping one another. And Occupy itself started on the wake of the collapse, the economic collapse. Without that, you never would have seen Occupy a few years later. And Black Lives Matter was based on the unfortunate deaths of the various black men and women across the country. So you've got to find these moments where that energy that the mainstream media maybe is talking about can be, and therefore America is already discussing it. It's in their zeitgeist. It's in there every day. You take that moment and use that energy towards large-scale change. So whether you love Bernie Sanders right now or not, Bernie Sanders is that energy. Right. And as he's said, and as many have said, it needs to be beyond just him. You need to use this moment to create something much larger than a fucking guy, a dude. It needs to be a lot of people, a lot of men and women and non-binaries. It needs to be a little bit of everybody. And you've got to take those moments. You got to take advantage of them, like a ninja. You got to take the energy and rechannel it towards often something positive. I'm not saying Bernie Sanders' campaign is not positive, but many of these come off of disasters and stuff. But part of it is being ready as an organizer and as an activist and as a protester to realize that energy, see it, and go, hey, this is great. I understand why you people are mad at this. Let's look at the bigger picture and take that anger and channel it.
Amen. I think that's a good jumping off point
to jump to the end of the episode.
To jump from the episode into the real world, Lee. Into sending people out into the real world to go fuck some shit up.
They can't go out yet. They have to go over to Patreon to listen to the last 10 minutes. Over at patreon.com/commoncensored. If you sign up, you'll get an extra 10 to 15 minutes. You guys keep us going. Without you, we would not be able to do this show. So thank you so much for doing that. And Dallas, Austin, Eleanor is headed to Denver. My shows are at redactedtour.com. Her shows are at artkillingapathy.com. And we love you guys. Keep fighting for the truth out there.
Act out.